In the 1970s, one thing sold more than anything else. Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon. Using sex to sell products is a trope with a long history, but it reached its peak in the 1970s. And right in the middle of it was bottle number 97, Black Velvet Canadian Whiskey. Unlike some of the other bottles I've talked about, the brand doesn't have much of an interesting history. It was launched in the 1950s by Gilbey's of Canada, makers of Bottle 78, Gilbey's Gin. They wanted to expand their production to get into the growing market for Canadian whiskey and launched several whiskey brands. The one that took off, especially in the US, was Black Velvet. Initially, it was advertised the same way as the other Canadian whiskey brands on the market, by playing up its Canadianness and its corresponding reputation for quality. This is the time period when Canadian whiskey was the fastest growing segment of the US whiskey market, fueled by consumer demand shifting to lighter, less flavorful whiskeys, as I've talked about in many prior episodes. Canada was just better at making that kind of whiskey than its US competitors. But starting in the 1970s, the brand's US distributor, Heublein Inc., took things in a different direction. I've talked about Heublein before in bottle number 21 about Jose Cuervo tequila, and more importantly in bottle number 50, Smirnoff vodka. As the Smirnoff story demonstrates, Heublein really understood marketing and how to sell a product. And in the 1970s, one thing sold more than anything else: incredibly sexist advertising. For Black Velvet, that was embodied in its Touch the Velvet campaign, which featured images of beautiful, usually blonde women dressed in black velvet, with various implications that every man would love to touch the velvet. A man loves to come home to black velvet, said one, positioning the woman and the bottle as essentially interchangeable commodities. The ads were the brainchild of F. William Free, an advertising executive who made his name creating some of the most sexist advertising of the 1970s. That included Silva Thins with a slogan of, "Cigarettes are like women, the best ones are rich and thin." Free's most notorious campaign was the Fly Me campaign for National Airlines, which featured pictures of stewardesses and invited the viewer to fly me to their destination. The Black Velvet ads weren't without controversy, even in their time. In 1975, Oregon liquor officials ordered the company to take down their billboards, saying they were too salacious. In 1974, Free's work on the Fly Me campaign earned his company a Hall of Shame award from the National Organization of Women. At the same ceremony, his agency was also awarded the sarcastically named Keep Her in Her Place award for the Black Velvet campaign. The 1970s was the era of women's liberation, and advertisers struggled to figure out how to sell to women while also still using women to sell. So you've got the Virginia Slims "You've Come a Long Way, Baby" campaign, alongside ads for men's shoes featuring a naked woman on the floor admiring a shoe, all under the slogan, "Keep her where she belongs." Advertising today can still be pretty sexist, but it's not nearly so overt as it was in the 1970s. It's been a gradual change, which you can see in the ads. The Touch the Velvet campaign persists into the 1980s, which, as best as I can tell, is the era of My Tiny Bottle. Things start to calm down a bit in the 90s as the focus shifts to emphasizing the smoothness, including comparing it to a smooth performance. Then, in the 2000s, bourbon starts its comeback tour, and while Black Velvet is still a top-selling Canadian whiskey in the US, it's not heavily advertised anymore. The Black Velvet ads of My Bottles era definitely fall into the camp of advertising with women, not to them. Women are not being invited to touch the velvet. Whiskey is for men, just as velvet-clad women are. But just like the ads have slowly changed, so too have attitudes about women drinking whiskey. In the 1990s, only about 15% of whiskey drinkers in the US were women. Today, it's about 40%. I'm one of them, and I'll be joined by another one to taste this tiny bottle of Black Velvet. Be sure to come back for my next episode when I'll be joined by Katie Strieski, better known as Garnish Girl on Instagram. We'll taste this 1980s bottle up against a modern mini and see if we can taste the smoothness. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that episode, and why don't you hit the like or share buttons while you're down there. As always, feel free to leave a comment below or at my website, mytinybottles.com, or find me on social media at TammyLC on Blue Sky and at MyTinyBottles on Instagram and Facebook. And head on over to my Patreon for bonus content. Cheers! brainchild of these ads was F. William Free. He's not the brainchild. They are the brainchild of him.
Right.
The mastermind of these ads, I don't want to call him a mastermind. The ads were the brainchild of these ads.
As the brainchild.
The ads were the brainchild of. Okay.